The New York Attorney General is seeking $250 million for fraud. Additional penalties involve Mr. Trump and 3 of his children. James claims the former president and others manipulated property valuations for years in an effort to cheat the system. CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins me now on the set. We watched this together. It was clear from the start this is a large investigation, but it's happening at this unique moment. We're trying to figure out where it lines up and weighs against the other investigations. What were your big takeaways?
Well, one of the big takeaways is that this investigation tells us a lot about former President Trump, who he is now, but who he has been for the past 5 decades, going back to his real estate business in New York. I remember, Scott, when I first started covering Trump's presidential campaign in 2015, one of the stories I did at the time was about how he valued his own net worth. And Forbes magazine said he was worth around $4.1 billion, but the statement that he issued to reporters at the time was $9 billion. And I remember looking at it and saying to him at the time, how did you value your names in such a high way and billions of dollars just for the value of the Trump name? He said, that's what it's worth. That's what my people tell me. But now those kind of statements about what his financial people tell him, what he says publicly, under the intense legal spotlight of a civil suit in New York.
Yeah, that reporting dates back years. This investigation dates back years. Let's look at the top lines of the lawsuit. This is a civil challenge by the Attorney General, not a criminal one. It seeks, among other things, $250 million in damages. It bars Trump.org from conducting business. It also bars Trump and his children from serving as an officer or director of any business in the state of New York. And then there's that 5-year ban on Trump and his company from acquiring real estate, from applying for loans. This is a different type of threat to the former president. These other investigations, which might potentially be criminal in nature, don't directly hit him at the business level, at the financial level. How much does that mean to him from your reporting from the past few years?
Oh, it would mean a significant hit on his entire business enterprise if it ever got to that level. I spoke to Harry Littman, former prosecutor, earlier today. If we can listen to that for a moment, because he gets at this point. Harry, if this goes to trial, how hard would it be for the New York Attorney General to prove the case?
Great question. On the one hand, there are some challenges in proving Trump's intent, and because of the properties that he's alleged to have overvalued, it's sort of subjective how to value them. On the other hand, we're talking about valuations 500%, 600% more than their actual value, so it seems completely exaggerated and easy enough to prove.
So what Littman's getting at there is that this has a long way to go before it ever reaches the point you just detailed, which is a total eradication of the Trump business in New York State. First, we have to see, does Letitia James, the state attorney general, accept any kind of plea, any kind of agreement proffered by the Trump legal team to say, we'll settle this before it gets to trial? But maybe she wants a trial. She has been an aggressive state attorney general. She has tried to get Trump to talk. I was up in New York in August, just days after the FBI search in a separate Trump investigation. He took the Fifth over hundreds of times, sitting right across from Letitia James in New York. The question I have as a reporter is, does she want a trial to really say this is what the Trump organization did? We have proof of this, and for history, we're making this point, or does she look toward a settlement?
So if that went to trial, if that's in state court, she also made clear she's referred her findings to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, opening the door for another possible federal
What do you make of
investigation.
that? Where does this go with the feds?
It wouldn't seem like the feds would find this to be a surprise, like this would be a great revelation to federal investigators. If this has been on the Attorney General's radar for years, if this has been reported on by media for years, presumably the U.S. Attorney isn't gobsmacked by a referral from Tish James. But the thing is, it would be just the latest in a sequence of federal investigations that have some nexus to the former president. If you add in what's going on at Mar-a-Lago, you add in the grand jury meeting in Washington, D.C., which is now subpoenaed dozens of Trump's associates, then the other local investigation in Georgia over the election. At some point, former president's got to push back on all of these investigations in a big way. But were you surprised we didn't hear from him after the Attorney General of New York calls him out for his business practices, calls him a fraudster and a schemer?
Well, when you're under investigation, anything you say can be used against you in the court of law. So any kind of statement would be under legal scrutiny. This is not a political campaign. And your point about the federal prosecutors and whether they will take this on is an important one, because Merrick Garland, as Attorney General, the Southern District of New York, all these prosecutors have a lot on their plate already. And it looks like these grand juries in Washington investigating alternate electors, investigating January 6th, seem to be the most ripe when it comes to Trump investigations. And to suddenly take a toss of a football, legally speaking, from this New York Attorney General, they could do it, but they could also focus the investigative powers of the federal government on what they've already had operating here in Washington.
It doesn't preclude the possibility some of these investigations may intersect at some point. Now, there was some response, a curated written response from Trump's attorney today about what Tish James laid out. He says, today's filing is neither focused on the facts nor the law. Rather, it's solely focused on advancing the Attorney General's political agenda. It's abundantly clear the Attorney General's office has exceeded its statutory authority by prying into transactions where absolutely no wrongdoing has taken place. And the former president posted today on his medium of choice, Truth Social, and said Attorney General Letitia, in his words, Peekaboo James, a total crime-fighting disaster in New York, is spending all of her time fighting for very powerful and well-represented banks and insurance companies who were fully paid, made a lot of money, and never had a complaint about me, instead of fighting murder and violent crime, which is killing New York State. She's a failed AG whose lack of talent in the fight against crime is causing record numbers of people and companies to flee New York. The Attorney General does not have criminal oversight in New York. That would be for the local district attorneys.
You didn't read bye-bye. He said that at the end of the statement.
Missed the exclamation point there, too. At some point, Letitia James takes a next step. She indicated during her news conference today there may have been settlement talks or negotiations.
She acknowledged that.
What'd you make of that? Somebody's turning down an offer. One side seems to be.
Well, she said publicly, which we had been hearing for weeks, that there had been some kind of settlement discussion. But she said she has pushed back against any kind of Trump legal team offer. And that doesn't necessarily mean she wants to bring this to trial, but she's negotiating if she is moving toward a settlement. She wants the Trump team to maybe make a major acknowledgement of wrongdoing, should they choose to do so.
Robert Costa, lots to unpack today, but it's just the day that ends in Y, where there's lots of legal news to unpack this week.
What a riptide of information all this is.
There'll be more tomorrow. Robert Costa, thank you very much.
We need a break sometime, Scott.
No breaks.